Good afternoon, viewers and listeners. Welcome back to the latest episode of the Free Marketeers podcast. I'm joined today by Jacques, Jonker and Mpiyakhe Dhlamini. We've managed to herd some of the cats today and get them in the same room, in the same virtual room. I hope all of you are ready for the freedoms that come with level 3 next week, that you're going to be responsible and not just descend into anarchy, but we'll see how it plays out. Jacques and Mpiyakhe, thank you guys for being with me. Always enjoy talking to you guys a lot, getting your take on what's happening. I thought we would start off by, I think, one of the biggest items, probably from the lockdown and indeed maybe democratic South Africa as a whole in the last 25 years or so. The alleged murder/killing of Mr. Collins Khosa by members of the South African National Defence Force. This happened early on in the lockdown, allegedly. The Minister of Defence on Thursday said the inquiry into the death of Mr. Khosa is not complete, and as such there can be no determination on whether he was murdered. And then earlier on Thursday, the legal team representing his family rejected an inquiry report by the SANDF, which apparently cleared soldiers of causing his death. Jacques, what do you think of that? Surely we need an independent body to do this kind of report, that the body that of the members who are accused found that they didn't do anything wrong. That shouldn't be that surprising.
Yeah, it's not surprising. I do think we need an independent body, obviously. Yeah, so I think the case should be open for prosecution, and the report that cleared them, whether it was a commission or whomever did that investigation, will also be investigated in this instance. But yeah, where there's smoke, there's a fire.
How does it work with a body like the SANDF? Who has oversight over them? Is it the president? Is it parliament? How exactly does it work?
No, the constitution says it's parliament, so parliament has oversight. Obviously the president as well, but he's the commander-in-chief effectively.
Right.
But yeah, parliament effectively has oversight.
Mpiyakhe, to you, I mean, the president, the last time he spoke to the nation, he talked about the government being more accountable and owning its mistakes. I mean, if he puts it down to just a mistake, the alleged murder of a man for drinking alcohol in his garden, I'm worried about what he would say other mistakes are by the state. But just, I don't know, just a callous attitude, I think, on behalf of the president and his army.
Yeah, bro. It's not. Yeah, it's supposed. It's not supposed to be his army. It's supposed to be the South African National Defence Force, and it's supposed to be a constitutional force. But yeah, no, it's there is a sense of callousness and just not taking this seriously. Even the judge himself commented on this if you read the judgment, and so it remains to be seen what will happen. I mean, they are supposed to submit the results of their inquiry to the court a certain number of days after having completed the inquiry. So let's see what the court says, but I doubt that this would be acceptable, especially since the family has said that no, they don't accept this.
Yeah, I'm glad that they're taking it further. Okay, moving on to the next item. There have been some calls for the government to unlock retirement funds. Now, I'm guessing for some people listening, as soon as they hear the calls for government to do anything with any funds, they might get worried. But Mpiyakhe, I think on this one, you might have an idea that this could be good in a way.
Yes, so what we're talking about here is just removing the tax penalties for people who want to access their retirement funds. So if you want to access your RA or whatever, then there are certain tax penalties applied by the state in order to encourage you to save and to retire not broke and presumably be a burden on everyone else. And so this is what needs to be the government. This is what needs to be. The Minister of Finance can, through a change, can allow individuals to access their funds in their accounts. So anyone who has a retirement account can, instead of waiting until you retire, you can just access it now. But I think this is a good idea. It won't cost the state anything. It's your money, so you'll be spending your money. It won't be the state's money, and it will still be subject to whatever contract you have. So this is just removing the state, the regulatory requirement by the state, which regulates these pensions. And so it will just clear that barrier and then allow the transactions to just evolve between the individual and the company involved. So it would make it freer.
Okay, so maybe to you, Jacques, is this then one of the good ways in which we can stimulate economic activity? I know we don't like talking about anyone getting involved in stimulating activity on behalf of others, but do you think this might be a good idea in the long run?
Yeah, I think it's a good idea. I think it just boils down to individual choice and the contracts those who invest in retirement annuities and provident funds, etc., have with their providers. And if they request that this be done, and the actuaries who analyze the risks of this being done, the special drawing benefits being afforded, if everybody involved gives the go, then yeah, I think it should definitely be done. I think Parliament should really take quick action on this issue. If people want to access their savings because they're running out of money, it's their prerogative, it's their money.
Mm-hmm. Yeah. Okay. That's maybe a
better than
good note
going
there on that particular one. Sorry, Mpiyakhe, go ahead.
I'm saying that for some people, like taking some of your retirement funds now, it's going to leave you short for retirement. That's just a fact. But it's better than taking on more debt.
Yeah.
You still have to pay interest on the debt.
Yeah. Well, speaking of the debt, that was my next point for discussion. Was there's in one article the journalist said that the Reserve Bank is, quote, running out of options because they've lowered interest rates so much now, and some people might be calling for quantitative easing and that sort of thing as a solution for the country's debt problems. But on the debt issue, I know with the repo rate being cut now, people in effect pay less on their car payments and stuff like that, for example, but it's bad for their savings in the long run. So do you think we're just going to see these mounting calls now that the Reserve Bank has run out of all options but to pursue some problematic measures, Mpiyakhe?
Yeah, there are already those calls. The Communist Party is pushing strongly within the ANC. The Young Communist League has tabled proposals. The Communist Party is tabling proposals as well. So they are involved in the ANC's internal sort of crisis planning for the COVID-19 economic crisis. And so because you must remember that we only have temporary emergency measures for now. The substantive measures are going to come about probably in June or even later, when Minister Mboweni tables his emergency budget. And so because of that, there's still a lot of jostling. But when it comes to Reserve Bank policy, the Reserve Bank pretty much has the power to do a lot of things. It's just so it's up to the Reserve Bank whether they listen to the Communist Party, they listen to more rational voices in society. So it's up to them, but they already have the power. I mean, officially they've already initiated a program of QE. Now, what I heard from Russell Lamberti, who's an economist at ATM Analytics, was that they've been very conservative about the QE. Officially, the program has started up, but they've been buying few. They've been buying much bonds, much in the way of government bonds, and so this might change. If government decides to go the route of massive stimulus, let's say they pass another stimulus package of R1 trillion or more, then I think the Reserve Bank might be forced to implement QE. Because what QE does is provide a bid for government debt. It provides, it allows that whenever you want to sell government debt, there's always a buyer on the other side. So in that way, so that's obviously supports government, makes the cost of borrowing cheaper and so on.
I think that's pretty useful. And to me quite terrifying. Jacques, what do you think of that? I know I don't want to put you on the forecasting spot. I'm not asking you to be Frans Cronje and give us scenarios of what's going to play out, but do you foresee the Reserve Bank going one way or the other?
I don't think they'll lower rates and maybe keep it constant, but with respect to the quote-unquote space that they're running out of, yes, and even modern monetary theorists recognize that a very crucial limit that's placed on this expansionary monetary policy and is your inflation rates in your country that effectively harms savers and harms consumers as well, and only incentivizes people to pick up bad debts. So basically what's happening now is we're still forecasting inflation to be above 4% for 2021 onwards. Basically, the implication of this is with higher interest rates, the rand temporarily strengthened, but over the long run, it will weaken. With a lower interest rate, it will weaken. And the implication of that is that a lot of our domestic industries are dependent on imports to produce, so that will affect producer price indices and then translate into a higher consumer price index, which will disincentivize saving even further. And as I've written before, is that there's a fallacy that consumption drives an economy. It's not consumption that creates wealth. It is savings and production. So what I think the Reserve Bank governor was referring to are the future inflationary implications of the policies that they are undertaking at the moment. as I just mentioned, through the exchange rate channel. But then also think about the fact that the returns that depositors in banks will now see, those returns will be lower because banks are effectively less dependent on depositors at the moment, because they can borrow money cheaply from the Reserve Bank at the moment. So the returns that savers are seeing on their deposits is lower, and that's only the nominal returns. Then you adjust for inflation. Now imagine your nominal return drops and it stays low, but then in future inflation picks up because of the expansionary policies implemented a year or two ago, because there are time lags with monetary policy. Your real return on your savings will drop even further. It might even be negative, and then there's simply no point in saving. You're just going to take out your money and spend it. But another problem with that is if there's not a concomitant rise in output in your economy when you increase the money supply, it's just simply going to increase inflation, not actually going to increase output. And economists have warned that a lot of businesses will not return. Mm-hmm. This is a very structural hit to our economy. So when you have lower levels of output in future than what you would have had sans any exogenous shock like the pandemic and the lockdown to the economy, if you pump in a lot of liquidity now and that liquidity is not extracted in the future again, then you're effectively going to see massive levels of, not necessarily massive, but you are going to see higher levels of inflation, possibly up to 5%, and couple that with depreciating exchange rates and lower interest rates, and how this will effectively induce a massive wealth transfer from savers to borrowers in the economy. You know, the Reserve Bank, the Setler Konyaku was spot on when they said they're running out of space in terms of just inflation itself. So I think at the next MPC meeting, I do not think they will drop interest rates any further. I think they might possibly even raise them, you know, just to relieve some pressure on savers and on producers in the economy, as well as on consumers in the future. Because what we also have to remember is is that effectively you're going to see massive tax deficits at SARS, mm-hmm. and taxpayers will be required to pay for this in the future. So now imagine in the future you've got extremely high tax rates, you've got high levels of inflation, you've got low returns on your savings. I mean, this is a recipe for disaster. So I think the Reserve Bank is in a difficult position, and I think the correct call now would be not to lower the repo rate any further, but in fact to either keep it constant or progressively start increasing it again.
So what do you have any, I guess, advice for, you know, anyone in particular? Maybe this is the best thing now just to pay off your debts that you have, that kind of thing? Or is that the only thing that people can do now that might help in the long run? Is there anything else that jumps out, either of you?
Well, yes, debt obviously should always start to pay it. And remember, lower interest rates, if it translates into high levels of inflation, that effectively benefits borrowers. It doesn't benefit those that extended the loans, and it doesn't benefit savers. It benefits borrowers because you're effectively paying less, even though the nominal amount still increases. You're effectively paying less because the money that you are paying back is worth less, not worthless, just worth less than what it would have been saved in higher levels of inflation. So yeah, I think those with massive levels of debt, not currently with low expected levels of inflation, they will not, it will actually not be that conducive to an environment to pay back your debt all of a sudden. I don't think you'll be able to in a slowdown economy, but if inflation rises up in the future, yeah, that will benefit those people with massive levels of debt. But the drawback to this is government prefers high levels of inflation because that also makes it easier for them to pay back their own debt, mm-hmm. as well. But, you know, it's a bit of a catch-22. You know, then I want to tell people with lots of debt, if inflation rises in the future again, as the SRB predicted it will, you know, use the high levels of inflation to pay back your debt. But at the same time, you do not want to disincentivize savings, and savings and production drive economic growth at the end of the day.
Yeah. Okay. That's been useful for me, at least, to try and understand what I can do, maybe in the immediate future. Some of the things people need to do as moves. I know we're all getting focused on the bad of the lockdown, but at some point we need to decide how we're going to move forward and somehow get out of it in whatever way we can, with whatever we can pull through, I suppose. Mpiyakhe, I thought I'd give you the final word on today's episode, just a final topic. You wrote a report that we published last week or 2 weeks ago that's on our website, viewers and listeners, if you'd like to go read that. But I thought if you could just give maybe a bit of an executive summary on your report, some of the things you found basically around heading out of the lockdowns, ending the lockdowns.
Yeah. And so it's not really a proposal for ending the social distancing or quarantining. That might continue depending on what individuals does.
Right.
Or basically what the report does is basically look at the fact that you can't really make decisions on decisions like this because you run into numerous pitfalls. One of the biggest pitfalls that you run into is that unintended consequences. So because you are not taking account of people's the goals, desires, and the actions they would take to pursue this. You are enforcing your own goals and desires. So the state has a goal. We want to save as many lives as possible. So the state implicitly assumes that this is now everyone's goals in society, in the economy, but that's not necessarily the case. It's not necessarily even the goal of the majority of people in an economy. We just don't know. And the only reliable means people have of expressing these preferences is having the freedom to express the preferences through markets and other things and other voluntary interactions in society. And so looking at that and the fact that there are also uncertainties coming from science itself, like just as we've seen with COVID-19, the model estimates have been changing all the time. Like when it first started, we were getting numbers of 160,000. Eventually, we got to numbers of 45,000 over 3 years, and up to now, we're talking about 20,000 this year. And so, like, we really don't because this is the nature of science. Like, you make predictions, but this is an evolving research area, and you can't take an area that has so much uncertainty. It's an active area of research and use that to take away people's rights. And for one thing, would violate the rule of law, for example, because how can it be rational? There's so much uncertainty that how can any decision made in the face of so much uncertainty be rational? And that undermines one of the most important principles of the rule of law. And so, just looking at the rule of law, the effect of unintended consequences is understood by Ludwig von Mises, and then finally, just looking at the statistical problems with making these kinds of decisions using data and science. And so basically the recommendation that comes out of that is that government should do the research, continue funding the research into COVID-19 and preparing the public sector. But the main thing is to allow the private sector to respond, to provide the information, the education to the private sector, to everyone in society, whether it's trade unions or whoever wants the information and recommendations from government scientists as to how to manage their risk. And then they get that information, and then like we did with HIV and AIDS. So one of the things that I did in the report is that if you look at there was a study done on HIV and AIDS and the impact of the educational campaign in South Africa, and you actually see that it was an effective campaign. It did change behavior, and so we do know the South Africans they do want to save their lives if you give them the information that they need to do it. So you don't need to do anything more than that. Just prepare the public sector, the public healthcare sector for poor people, but and at the same time allow the private sector to be free to respond and generate the income that you need to ultimately fund the public response.
I don't think either of you, well, you might have, but if you've done a lot of in-depth study into how the government has prepared or not, but just, I'm going to put you on the spot here, but do either of you have an idea of whether we've used the time effectively or not? Because my impression is that we haven't,
So basically, I looked into what Professor Shabir Mahdi in particular was saying. I saw he wrote an op-ed in Business Day. He wrote another one in News 24 along with other academics like Alex Van Heerden. And then he was also involved in a webinar with Mark Haywood for the Maverick. And so across all of these platforms, he consistently saying the same thing, that in terms of our preparedness as South Africa, we wasted the initial lockdown. Because that's when we should have been ramping up our testing capacity. Then the National Health Service, the National Health Laboratory Services had made promises that they would be able to scale up to 35,000 tests a day. And then they are still below 10,000 tests today. And so all of these things, we wasted the opportunity. We didn't implement the track and trace systems because according to best practice, according to international evidence, more than 80% you have to track more and trace more than 80% of the contacts in order to be able to contain the spread of this virus using a lockdown. So we have no capacity do that. We haven't been able to do that throughout the entirety of the lockdown. This days, more than 60 days now. We haven't been able to do that. And in fact, we just had yesterday that they could be up to 100,000. There could be a backlog of up to 100,000 in testing. And so our strategy is completely wrong. And then Professor Mari suggested a different strategy where we use the antibody test to basically put out the fires in the hotspots and not and just avoid the lockdown completely. And so this has been talked about. And these are government scientists. They are in the ministerial advisory committee. So these are government scientists saying these things.
Does the massive backlog of tests that have been processed, doesn't that in some way indicate that we should be very careful before adopting something like the NHI, where the government controls all aspects of healthcare? Surely this should be seen as some sort of proof. And this isn't just, we can make the ideological argument, but we've seen now what happens.
Yeah, exactly. And in the beginning of the lockdown, most of the testing was being done by private testing companies. I'm just trying to, like Lancet laboratories and so on. So there were most of the testing in the beginning. So I don't know how the data looks now, but I think it shows like something like an NHI is a better idea, because you run into these bottlenecks and you won't have options. Mm-hmm. So we should really think carefully about these things now.
No. And on top of the cost arguments against the NHI, there's definitely practical implications and concerns people should have. But I think we'll end on that one for this week. Guys, I want to thank you again for your time, for joining me. I've really appreciated it. Viewers and listeners, I hope you've enjoyed the episode as well. Please remember to like the video. Please subscribe to our channel. Please share the video on your various social media platforms. Please also remember that you can find our podcasts on Spotify, on Google Podcasts, and a few other platforms now. Please go and subscribe there if you prefer listening there, and tell people that we're available there as well. I hope you'll all have a good weekend going ahead, and then going into level 3 of lockdown next week. Let's see how it shakes out and how things play out in the next few weeks and months. But for now, we thank you for your time, and we'll talk to you again soon. Cheers.